Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Captain Lena Hart sat quietly, a ghost in the brightly lit officers' mess, her presence deemed as inconsequential as the paper napkins folded neatly on the table. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the overpowering cologne of misplaced confidence. She was a logistics coordination officer, a title deliberately vague, designed to attract attention to nothing. To the dozen male pilots surrounding her, she was a non-factor, a competent, yet utterly unremarkable captain who pushed papers and occasionally asked annoying questions about fuel consumption rates. This was the persona she had meticulously cultivated, the perfect cover. But sometimes, the silence was deafening, and the weight of being perpetually underestimated became a heavy cloak. For 20 long minutes, she listened to Lieutenant Commander Jake Razor Morrison lecture on a topic he knew only theoretically, and she knew in her bones. He was explaining, for the third time, why women pilots would never have the reflexes for real air-to-air combat. Lena offered a polite smile and a subtle nod in the right places, a masterclass in silent resilience. Her internal landscape, however, was a cold, hard place where she cataloged every word. Reflexes, he said. He spoke with the careless authority of a man who confused volume with experience. What he didn't know, what she carefully kept hidden, was the number 11 enemy aircraft she'd shot down in her previous deployment. The sheer, exhausting arrogance of his pronouncement was not just a personal insult. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of what air combat truly required. It wasn't about gender or reflexes. It was about making better decisions under pressure. She learned early in her life that being underestimated was often an advantage. People told you things when they didn't think you mattered. They made mistakes when they didn't see you as a threat. This quiet deception, this self-imposed role, was her greatest weapon. It was the genesis of her internal conflict, the struggle between the need for silent resilience and the fierce, burning desire for truth. Razor, a competent pilot with decent skills but a massive ego, was busy regaling the junior officers with stories of his almost kills, each tale becoming more elaborate with every retelling. Lena had heard versions of this story from dozens of pilots over the years. She knew the truth of the fighter-pilot brotherhood. The guys who actually had kills rarely talked about them. The guys who talked constantly about kills rarely had any. It was a simple, brutal law of the air. Her current assignment at Al-Azad Air Base was a cover, a deliberately vague title that granted her access to everything while attracting attention to nothing. On paper, she was reviewing supply chains and coordinating equipment transfers. In reality, she was forward-deployed intelligence, gathering information on enemy air capabilities while maintaining her flight proficiency during classified night missions that officially never happened. This dual life demanded a constant, low-level anxiety, the fear of a momentary slip, a forgotten procedure, a casual word that could shatter the entire fragile deception. The sudden, piercing scream of the alarm klaxon ripped through the mess hall like a physical blow. The change was instantaneous, transforming the complacent, conversational space into a chamber of raw, panicked adrenaline. The bass loudspeakers crackled to life with a chilling message that made everyone's blood run cold. Scramble, scramble, scramble. Incoming enemy strike package. Multiple bogies inbound. All available aircraft. Immediate launch. This is not a drill. The words hung in the air, a terrifying counterpoint to Razor's earlier bravado. This was the moment of truth, the sudden, brutal intersection of their theoretical world and the deadly real one. Razor reacted with a surge of clumsy excitement, jumping up and knocking his coffee across the table. Finally, some real action, he declared, his voice a breathless mixture of exhilaration and fear. He glanced at Lena, offering what he probably thought was a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, we've got this. You should probably head to the shelter." The sheer, casual dismissal stung, not because it was mean-spirited, but because it was so utterly unconscious. She was the paperwork, the fuel consumption rate, the non-combatant, the woman who needed shelter. Lena stood slowly, her movements economical and precise, a stark contrast to the scrambling chaos of the other pilots. She picked up her flight bag that she always kept within reach, a small, silent defiance, and headed for the door. The moment was suspended, a silent film playing out against the shrieking backdrop of the alarm. Her face was calm, betraying nothing of the focused, steel-trap mind calculating the distance to her F-16C and the minimum time needed for pre-flight. Just before stepping into the rush of the hallway, she paused. She had to break character just slightly enough to plant a seed of doubt, a final, poetic riposte to the 20 minutes of condescension. "Actually," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise with an almost unnatural calm, "I think I'll head to the flight line." Razor, already halfway out the door and pulling on his gear, stopped, bewildered. "Why? You a crew chief or something?" The question tossed over his shoulder was the ultimate summation of her perceived role. She paused at the doorway, looked back at the dozen male pilots scrambling for their gear, their faces a mask of sudden, frantic purpose. She allowed herself a small, secret smile, a reflection of silent resilience and the exhilarating knowledge of the storm she was about to unleash. "Or something," she whispered, a promise and a warning. And then she was gone, moving into the controlled chaos of the base, the false identity of the logistics officer finally, exhilaratingly being shed. This sudden shift from quiet observation to active participation was the end of one life and the beginning of another. The next 47 minutes would be etched into the classified history of air combat, an engagement that would become a legend. But for Lena, it was simply the opportunity to stop playing a role and start being herself again. The pilots she left behind, scrambling and panicked, were about to learn that the quiet logistics officer they'd been ignoring was a phantom, a carefully constructed illusion. She was not just a pilot. She was Viper, the Air Force's most lethal air-to-air killer with more confirmed kills than anyone currently flying. And every man in that mess hall, consumed by their anxiety and their own limited perceptions, was about to face a deadly reality. 4 enemy MiG-29s would enter the battle space. 4 would never leave. The run to the flight line was a blur of calculated movements, a contrast of the frantic, disorganized haste around her and the preternatural calm that had settled over her own mind. This internal calm, forged in the crucible of multiple combat deployments, was her greatest edge. It wasn't just physical composure. It was the ability to manage the overwhelming sensory input of a crisis and translate it into a simple 3-step action plan. Get to the jet, power it up, and launch. The airbase had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Ground crews were moving with desperate speed, scrambling to prepare aircraft for immediate launch. Pilots were running from the operations building, already pulling on their flight suits and survival vests. The tower's voice was a constant, tense broadcast on all frequencies. Unknown aircraft bearing 270, range 80 mi, closing fast, multiple contacts. Estimate 12 to 15 aircraft in main strike package. Lena moved through the accelerating crisis with a dancer's grace, heading directly for the aircraft revetment that housed her secret. Her F-16C, the one marked with generic tail numbers and no unit insignia. This anonymity was vital. It was the final layer of her cover, a physical manifestation of her deliberate obscurity. It was her own little ghost in the machine. As she approached the revetment, she felt a profound surge of determination. This wasn't just a mission. It was a necessary cleansing of the system, a forceful, undeniable pushback against the sexism, the underestimation, and the dangerous complacency she had witnessed in the mess hall. Her internal reflection turned philosophical. True strength was not in the telling but in the doing, and the moment for doing had arrived. She was Viper, and Viper did not need to speak to prove her worth. The pilot's instinct for danger told her what the base commander had already confirmed. The intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. Alazad was not a minor logistics hub. It was home to a squadron of F-16 Fighting Falcons and a rotating detachment of special operations personnel. This surprise daytime strike was targeted, a calculated move by the enemy to eliminate the threat with overwhelming force before anyone could react. The mystery of the intelligence leak, who knew what and how, remained a terrifying open loop, but that was a problem for the logistics officer to solve later. The pilot had a more immediate and visceral problem: the defense of the base. Her crew chief, Master Sergeant Chen, was already there, a silent partner in her decade-long deception. He was pulling the chalks and doing the final pre-flight inspection. Chen did not salute her. It was too much of a tell for who she really was, but his relief was obvious. "Ma'am, thought you might be stuck in the admin building," he said, his voice tight. "Not today, Sergeant," Lena replied, already climbing the ladder, the world narrowing to the confines of the jet. The familiar scent of avgas and ozone filled her lungs, a strange, comforting perfume of the battlefield. She ran through her pre-flight checks, a blur of motion and memory, the speed born from thousands of hours in the cockpit. She didn't need a checklist. The sequence was etched into her muscle memory, a ritual of preparation for death. Status: full fuel, full combat load. 4 AIM 120 AMRAAMs, 2 AIM 9X Sidewinders, full 20 ammunition. Chen's final report was a grimly professional affirmation of readiness. "Aircraft is code 1 and ready to kill things, ma'am." The sheer intensity of the moment, the knowledge that she was the only one who truly understood the gravity of the incoming threat, sharpened her focus. She settled into the cockpit, the familiar embrace of the ejection seat harness and helmet connecting her to the aircraft. It was an extension of her nervous system, a 30,000-pound weapon guided by her will. Her hands moved through the startup sequence automatically, watching the gauges come alive, listening to the Pratt and Whitney F-110 turbofan engine begin its distinctive whine. The F-16 had been her aircraft for 8 years. She knew every sound, every vibration, every quirk of the fly-by-wire system. This particular jet, tail number 471, was a partner in her secret history. It had been with her for 3 years and 17 kills. She had no need to name her aircraft. The kill markers spoke for themselves. Through her canopy, she watched the main body of the squadron taxi out. There was Razor in the lead, his aircraft marked with his call sign and an elaborate, regulation-violating Sharkmouth paint job. Typical, she thought, a brief, dismissive moment of reflection. Her radio crackled with the tower's voice. "Enemy strike package now bearing 265. Range 60 mi. Closing at 480 knots. We have visual identification." MiG-29 Fulcrums, approximately 14 aircraft in 2 groups. They're coming in fast and they're coming in heavy. The MiG-29s, Russian-built, highly capable air superiority fighters, fast, maneuverable, and flown by pilots who'd been training for exactly this kind of strike mission. This was not going to be an easy fight. She switched to the tactical frequency, the one reserved for the highest level of combat command. Tower, Viper checking in, ready for taxi. The name hung in the air, a shockwave of recognition. There was a pregnant pause, then a different authoritative voice cut in: "Colonel Sarah Hendricks, the base commander." "Viper Falcon lead, authenticate Alpha 79er." The authentication was the final, irreversible step. The logistics officer was gone, and the predator had been unleashed. Lena pulled out her card and gave the code: "Authenticate Bravo 33." The colonel's response was immediate, resolute, and carried the weight of full tactical authority. "Confirmed. Viper, you are weapons-free and cleared for combat operations. Give them hell." "Roger that." She taxied out behind the main formation, watching Razor and his wingmen launch in pairs, afterburners blazing, climbing hard to intercept the incoming threat. She waited her turn, running final combat checks: radar check, weapon systems check, targeting pod check, countermeasures loaded and ready, communications encrypted and secure. The silence in her cockpit was not empty. It was filled with the methodical internal chant of the warrior. "Viper, you are cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Winds 250 at 15. Altimeter 29.92. Good hunting." Viper rolling. She advanced the throttle to military power, felt the F-16 strain against the brakes, and then in a single fluid motion released them and slammed the throttle into afterburner. The jet leapt forward with 50,000 lb of thrust. the acceleration pinning her back into the seat. Air speed building, 80 knots, 100, 120, 140. She rotated smoothly at 150 knots, and the F-16 leaped into the air like it had been launched from a catapult. Gear up, flaps up, accelerating through 300 knots, climbing hard, turning to intercept bearing. Viper airborne, heading 270, climbing to Angels 20. The world below was a distant, receding map. At 20,000 FT, the battlefield unfolded on her radar display, a chilling tapestry of inbound threats. Razor and his 3 wingmen were vectoring to intercept the main formation, 12 MiG-29s in 2 groups of 6, approaching in textbook Soviet-style combat formation. The situation was already messy. But Lena's focus, honed by the constant anxiety of her intelligence role, was immediately drawn to a deeper, more sinister threat. Her radar, enhanced by upgrades that weren't in any official documentation, showed something else entirely. 4 additional contacts lower and faster, taking a wide flanking route that would bring them in behind the base's defenders. This was the classic hammer and anvil. The main formation, the 12 MiGs, was the anvil, obvious, threatening, demanding all the attention. But these 4 flankers, the hammer, were sneaking in low, using terrain masking and electronic warfare to hide from the base's standard radar. Their intent was clear, to strike the base while its defenders were engaged elsewhere. They were a silent, deadly dagger aimed at the throat of the airbase, and nobody else had seen them yet. Lena keyed her mic, her voice calm but urgent, her heart a steady, slow drum in her chest. Falcon lead, Viper. I have 4 additional bandits bearing 245, range 40 me, Angels 5, speed 520 knots. They're flanking low while you engage the main force. Razor's voice came back, strained with the G-forces of combat maneuvering. Negative, Viper. We only show the main group. You sure about that? The arrogance was gone, replaced by the confusion of a pilot whose limited systems were lying to him. Positive. I'm breaking off to engage the flankers. You handle the main force. Razor's automatic, ego-driven response, wait, who authorized, was instantly cut short. Colonel Hendrix's voice, clear and absolute, cut through the tactical frequency. She's authorized, Razor, Viper. Weapons free on the flankers. Keep them off our base. Lena didn't hesitate. Her single-minded determination took over. Roger, Viper. Engaging. She rolled inverted and pulled hard, diving toward the deck and vectoring to intercept the flanking group. 4 MiG-29s flown by pilots good enough to sneak past the base defenses. This was going to be interesting. The philosophical reflection returned, grounding her fear. The best opponent was the one who forced you to fly perfectly. At 10,000 FT, she leveled off and went supersonic. The F-16 punched through Mach 1 with barely a shudder, the silent, invisible shockwave an opening salvo. Her radar locked onto the lead MiG at 35 miles. The enemy pilots, maintaining radio silence and focused on their attack run, still had no idea she was there. This was the moment of silent resilience, the advantage of being the ghost, the predator they never saw coming. She armed her AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles with active radar guidance, the ultimate fire-and-forget technology that allowed her to engage multiple targets quickly. Her vision, despite the high-speed approach, was entirely focused on the HUD, the targeting solution a crystalline projection of death. At 30 miles, she achieved a solid radar lock on the lead MiG. The targeting computer confirmed the solution. Good lock, valid target, weapon ready. The words were a quiet, automated blessing of the kill. Fox 3, she called, her voice steady, squeezing the trigger. The AMRAAM dropped from the rail and its rocket motor ignited, accelerating the missile to Mach 4 in seconds. It streaked away on a white contrail, tracking toward the lead MiG. She didn't wait to see if it hit. She was already locking the second MiG. Target 1 is on its own. Time for Target 2. Lock. The physical act of switching targets while flying at supersonic speed was a testament to her mastery of the F-16. She felt the surge of adrenaline not as panic but as a pure, focused energy. Fox 3, second missile away. Target 3 before they know what hit them. Third MiG lock. Fox 3, 3 missiles in the air in less than 15 seconds. The enemy pilots still had no idea they were being hunted until the first missile hit. The lead MiG exploded in a massive fireball, a violent, undeniable flash visible from 40 miles away. The formation immediately broke, the pilots finally realizing they were under attack and scattering in different directions. The enemy flight leader's voice, a sudden burst of pure panic, sliced across the tactical frequency. Break right. Break right. We have missiles inbound. The anxiety and fear were clear, even through the heavy accent. Second missile impact. Another MiG dissolved into falling debris and flame. 2 down, 2 to go. But the third missile missed. The target MiG had gone into a violent defensive break, dumping flares and chaff while pulling maximum Gs. The AMRAAM seeker head was momentarily confused by the countermeasures, and the missile detonated harmlessly several hundred meters away. Expected, Lena thought, a quiet moment of reflection in the chaos. She had planned for this. The fourth MiG was now trying to run, going to full afterburner and diving for the deck where ground clutter might hide him. But Lena's advanced radar held the lock. Fourth AMRAAM away, Fox 3. This missile tracked perfectly the MiG pilot's defensive maneuvers coming too late. The warhead detonated just behind the aircraft, shrapnel tearing through the tail, plane, and engine. The MiG began trailing smoke and fire. Mayday, mayday, I'm hit. Ejecting, the pilot punched out, his ejection seat rocketing him clear. 3 down, 1 remaining. The surviving MiG pilot, however, was good. He wasn't panicking. He'd instantly recognized what was happening and gone immediately into offensive mode, turning hard toward Lena's F-16, trying to get a missile shot before she could engage him. Dangerous. This was not a rookie. This was a warrior fighting back. Her radar warning receiver screamed. The MiG had achieved radar lock and was launching. Defending, Lena called, braking hard left, pulling 9 Gs that made her vision gray at the edges despite her anti-G suit. She punched out chaff and flares, filling the sky with countermeasures while using violent maneuvering to destroy the MiG's targeting solution. The enemy missile, a Russian R-77, streaked close enough that she could see the fins. Too close. The brief surge of anxiety was immediately channeled into action. Both aircraft were now locked in a turning fight, each struggling to get into a firing position. The dogfight was old school, the kind that happened when long-range missiles failed and the fight devolved to short-range weapons or guns. Lena's training took over. The F-16 was lighter and more maneuverable than the MiG-29, but only if flown perfectly. She needed to force an overshoot, make the MiG pilot push too hard and blow past her, giving her the angle for a shot. She went vertical, the F-16 climbing straight up under full afterburner, trading speed for altitude. The MiG followed, both aircraft locked in a vertical scissors, each pilot trying to force the other to make a mistake. The internal battle was as fierce as the external one. Predictable, she thought. He will follow the bait. At 15,000 FT, Lena rolled inverted at the top of her climb and pulled through, converting altitude back into speed as she dove. The MiG tried to follow but made the critical error. He pulled too hard, bled off too much energy. Lena had her opening. She rolled right, pulling into a hard lag pursuit that put her squarely on the MiG's tail, offset just enough to prevent the enemy pilot from revering the situation. The targeting pipper in her heads-up display tracked across the enemy aircraft. She armed her AIM-9X Sidewinder, a close-range infrared missile impossible to defeat once locked. The growl of the missile seeker head found its target, a raw, triumphant sound in her helmet. Tone lock 2. The Sidewinder leapt off the rail, tracking flawlessly. The MiG pilot saw it coming, tried to brake, and dumped flares desperately. But the AIM-9X was a generation ahead of anything the enemy expected. Its imaging infrared seeker ignored the flares and tracked the MiG's hot engine exhaust with perfect precision. Impact. The warhead detonated against the MiG's left engine. The aircraft tumbled out of control, fire streaming from the destroyed power plant. Lena watched long enough to see the pilot eject successfully, Then she was already scanning for new threats. 4 MiGs engaged, 4 MiGs destroyed. Time elapsed, 11 minutes. She keyed her radio, the adrenaline settling into a cold, determined focus. Falcon lead. Viper, 4 flankers splashed. I'm Winchester on AMRAAMs but still have 2 Sidewinders and guns. Status of main force. Razor's voice came back, and for the first time it held respect instead of dismissal. Viper, Falcon lead. You just killed 4 bandits solo. The sheer awe in his voice was a profound, almost poetic reward. Affirmative, what's your status? Lena's mind had already moved on, prioritizing the greater threat. We've engaged the main force, splashed 3, but we're outnumbered and they're pressing hard. We could use, holy, break left, break left. The radio exploded with the sound of a desperate, chaotic engagement. The main force engagement was not going well. Lena checked her fuel, enough for another 15 minutes of combat. The time for silent resilience was over. Now was the time for overt, brutal effectiveness. She turned hard, lighting the afterburner, racing toward the main engagement. Falcon lead. Viper, inbound your position. Hold on. The main air battle was a swirling furball of 12 aircraft trying to kill each other in the same piece of sky. Contrails marked the paths of aircraft pulling maximum G turns. Smoke trails from missiles stitched through the air. She saw 2 parachutes drifting down, one friendly, one enemy. Her radar showed the tactical reality immediately. Razor and his remaining 2 wingmen were outnumbered 6-3, separated and fighting for their lives. The MiGs were pressing aggressively, their numerical advantage allowing them to attack from multiple angles. She had to change the equation fast. Falcon flight. Viper entering the fight from southwest. Stay clear of my 12-00. She came in fast, a ghost in the melee, identifying the nearest MiG harassing Razor's wingman. The enemy pilot was so focused on his target that he never saw Lena's F-16 drop in behind him. Time for old school. Guns 20 cannon. Old school, she squeezed the trigger. The M61 Vulcan cannon roared, 6,000 rounds per minute of 20 high explosive ammunition tearing through the air. The targeting computer guided her fire perfectly. Rounds walked up the MiG's fuselage, shattering the canopy and destroying the aircraft's hydraulics. The MiG fell away, the pilot ejecting immediately. Splash 5, Lena called calmly, already turning to engage the next threat. The MiG pilots suddenly realized they had a new, terrifying problem. Their tactical advantage evaporated as Lena tore through their formation, her F-16 appearing and disappearing in the chaos of combat like a ghost. Another MiG appeared in her gun sight. She fired again. Hit. The enemy aircraft spun away, smoking. Splash 6. The enemy pilots shifted to full defensive mode, breaking off their attacks to deal with this new, lethal threat. But Lena had spent years studying Soviet-style fighter tactics. She knew how they thought, how they moved, how they reacted to pressure. She used that knowledge ruthlessly. An enemy pilot tried to reverse on her, pulling into a vertical scissors. She went with him, let him think he was gaining position, then snap-rolled in a maneuver that put her instantly on his tail. Last Sidewinder lock. Fox 2 kill, Splash 7. The remaining MiGs had enough. They broke off the engagement and ran, diving for the deck and heading for the border at maximum speed. 12 aircraft had entered this battle space. 7 were destroyed. 5 were retreating. Falcon lead. Viper, bandits are running, do we pursue? Colonel Hendrix's voice, now a mixture of relief and disbelief, answered. Negative, Viper, let them go. I want you and Falcon flight back on deck. Good work. Lena performed a final tactical scan, confirmed no remaining threats, and turned for home. Her fuel was low, her ammunition exhausted. Time to land, rearm, and be ready for round 2. As she turned final approach, Lena could see the runway and a crowd gathered by the operations building. Word had spread about what had just happened. She landed smoothly, taxied in, and shut down the engine. The sudden silence after the roar of combat was profound, a space for reflection and the slow realization of the toll the fight had taken. When she climbed out of the cockpit, the entire squadron was there. Razor was in front, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and awe. "Viper," he said flatly. "The Viper. 11 kills over Syria, 6 over Yemen. Now 7 more today, 24 confirmed." He was reciting her classified kill count, the one she'd worked so hard to hide. "You're the highest-scoring air-to-air pilot in the entire Air Force." Lena removed her helmet, shook out her hair. "It's 28 now," she corrected gently, the number a cold, hard piece of truth that shattered the last vestige of her cover. She looked around at the assembled pilots. Anyone have a problem with female pilots not having the reflexes for real air-to-air combat? The silence was absolute. Good. The immediate aftermath was not a celebration of heroics, but a demand for professional respect and learning. The focus immediately shifted from who she was to what they needed to do next. "Then let's debrief this mission and figure out how they got so close without our early warning systems catching them, because that's the real problem we need to solve." The 2-hour debriefing was a masterclass. Lena walked the entire squadron through the engagement, using every contact as a teaching moment. She explained how she'd identified the flanking maneuver, why she'd engaged at specific ranges, how she'd managed her ammunition to ensure she had options throughout the fight, and the tactics that gave her advantages in turning combat. Razor listened intently, taking notes, asking intelligent questions. The embarrassment was gone, replaced by professional respect. He had seen real combat now and understood the difference between bragging about almost kills and actually achieving them. The younger pilots hung on her every word. Lieutenant Maria Santos, one of only 2 other female pilots in the squadron, sat in the front row, documenting everything. She had been quiet during Razor's earlier pontificating, but now her questions were sharp and tactical. "When you went vertical against the 4th MiG," Santos asked, "you were trading speed for altitude at a moment when he had energy advantage. What made you confident you could convert that back into a winning position?" Lena smiled, acknowledging a question born of true understanding. This was someone who grasped energy management in air combat. "I'd been watching his turns for 30 seconds, Lena explained. "He was aggressive but predictable. Every hard turn, he'd pull maximum G without thinking about energy conservation. I knew if I forced him vertical, he'd follow instinctively and overcommit. The vertical wasn't about gaining altitude. It was about baiting him into bleeding energy he couldn't afford to lose." She pulled up the flight recorder data on the big screen, the glowing map of her dogfight a testament to her mastery. "Watch here. He follows me up, pulls hard to stay with me, and there, see his air speed. He's down to 180 knots at the top. At that speed, the MiG-29 handles like a truck. Meanwhile, I've rolled inverted and I'm accelerating downhill. By the time he realizes the mistake, I've got 450 knots and I'm converting that into position." Santos nodded, scribbling notes, a silent oath of determination in her eyes. Afterward, Colonel Hendricks pulled Lena aside, the anxiety in the colonel's voice palpable. "The intelligence community is having a nervous breakdown," the colonel said. "The enemy knew too much about this base. This wasn't a random strike. This was targeted. We have a leak somewhere." The initial mystery of the enemy's knowledge had found its terrifying focus. "What do you need from me?" Hendricks asked. Lena's response was simple: "Keep doing what you're doing. Logistics officer by day. Lethal air superiority fighter when needed. See what you can find out through your channels." But the colonel paused, her gaze settling on Lena with a mixture of awe and concern. "Lena, your cover is blown with the squadron. Everyone knows what you can do now." "That's fine," Lena said. "The cover was to hide from the enemy, not our own people. And honestly, it might be better this way. These pilots needed to see that gender doesn't matter in the cockpit. Results matter." She felt a deep sense of pride, not for the kills, but for the lesson imparted. The colonel continued, her voice low and grave. "There's something else. Your engagement is all over the intelligence channels. 7 kills in one mission, 4 of them before the enemy even knew you were there. The other side is going to want revenge. Specifically, they're going to want you." "Let them try," Lena said, a sudden cold determination settling over her. Hendricks smiled grimly. "That's what I like about you, Captain. No quit." Over the next few days, the base returned to a new kind of normal. Lena resumed her logistics duties, but her presence had fundamentally changed the atmosphere. Pilots, especially the younger ones, now sought her out for advice, for training, for combat experience. She established a weekly tactical training session, walking through historical air combat engagements, breaking down what worked and what didn't. Attendance was mandatory for junior pilots, but even the experienced ones showed up. Razor became one of her most dedicated students. His ego had been shattered and rebuilt in the same day, and he emerged a better pilot for it. He found her one evening after a training session, the admission an act of humility and personal redemption. "I was an idiot in that mess hall," he admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about air combat was theoretical. You've actually done it repeatedly against people trying to kill you. I should have been listening instead of talking." "You weren't an idiot," Lena countered, her voice soft but firm. "You were confident, which isn't a bad thing. You just needed the experience to back it up. Now you have that. Use it." The exchange was a quiet, necessary closure to the initial conflict, a testament to the power of action over words. 2 weeks later, the enemy's silent retaliation began. Intelligence intercepted enemy communications, specifically mentioning the female American pilot who killed 7 of our best. They were planning something. Revenge for the losses, an attempt to reclaim their honor. The earlier mystery of the leak was now replaced by the chilling suspense of the counterattack. "They're going to come for you specifically," Hendricks said during their classified briefing. "Probably their top pilot. This will be personal." "Good," Lena said, a flicker of something cold and focused in her eyes. "Personal fights are predictable. They'll be emotional, aggressive. That gives me an advantage." The enemy's top pilot was Colonel Mail Vyulov, call sign Burkut Eagle. 32 confirmed kills, veteran of multiple conflicts. His psychological profile suggested a man who viewed air combat as personal honor. A female pilot killing 7 of his countrymen was an insult he couldn't ignore. 3 weeks after Lena's engagement, Vyulov issued his challenge over the tactical frequency that everyone monitored. His English was accented but clear, his tone one of cold, righteous rage. "This is Burkut to the American pilot called Viper. I know you hear this. 7 of my brothers you killed. This is not war. This is murder. I challenge you. 1 aircraft, 1 pilot, you and me. We settle this with honor, not hiding behind technology and numbers." The message repeated 3 times, then silence. The suspense was total. "It's a trap," Razor said immediately when they gathered in the operations center. "He's trying to draw you into an ambush. No way he fights fair." "Probably," Lena agreed. But her moral reflection had already decided the course of action. "But if I don't respond, he'll keep hitting our patrols trying to draw me out. People will die. Better to settle this directly." Colonel Hendricks was firm. "I can't authorize this. It's exactly what he wants." "Ma'am, with respect, this is happening whether we authorize it or not," Lena pressed, her voice unwavering. "He's made it personal. If I don't face him, he'll escalate until I have no choice. At least this way we control the circumstances. And if it is an ambush, then I'll handle it the same way I handled the flankers. Sir, I've been doing this a long time. Trust me." Hendricks looked at her for a long moment, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. She nodded slowly. "Radar surveillance only. Weapons tight for all other aircraft, but you have full support if this goes sideways. Won't need it." The next morning, Lena took off solo at dawn, climbing to 20,000 FT over neutral territory. She was an F-16 against a MiG-29 upgraded with the latest Russian avionics. This was not a fair fight. It was a duel of determination and skill. Burkut was waiting, his MiG-29 circling lazily, confident. Lena checked her radar. No other aircraft within 50 miles. Either this really was one-on-one, or his backup was running so low and quiet she couldn't detect them. She'd assume the latter and be pleasantly surprised if it was the former. "So you came, brave or foolish?" Burkut's voice was casual, almost friendly over the tactical frequency. "Let's find out," Lena replied. "Before we begin, I want you to know I respect your skill. 7 kills is impressive, but today you face someone who has been doing this since before you were born. Nothing personal." Everything about this is personal, Burkut. You made it that way, Lena countered. But it doesn't matter. Skill isn't about age or gender. It's about who makes those better decisions under pressure. Let's see who that is. They merged at a closing speed over Mach 1, both aircraft pulling through violent turns that would have torn apart lesser machines. Burkut was everything advertised: skilled, aggressive, unpredictable. His MiG-29 was equipped with thrust vectoring, giving him post-stall maneuvering capability that the standard F-16 couldn't match. But Lena had one advantage he didn't know about. She'd studied every piece of footage available on his previous kills. She knew his favorite tactics, his patterns, his tells. He was aggressive in the first 2 minutes, trying to establish dominance. Then he'd shift to patient, methodical flying. She needed to survive the aggressive phase and exploit the transition. The first 3 minutes were brutal. Burkut came at her with everything, pushing his aircraft to the edge of its flight envelope. The thrust vectoring let him point his nose at impossible angles, getting missile locks that should have been impossible. But getting a lock wasn't the same as making a kill. Lena's defensive flying was perfect, breaking locks with precise timing, using terrain and energy management to stay alive while burning through his missile inventory. His first 2 R-77 missiles missed. The third came close enough that she felt the warhead detonate behind her aircraft, shrapnel pinging off her tail. Damage, but nothing critical. Then she saw what she was waiting for. Burkut's flying changed. The aggressive maneuvers stopped. He settled into a methodical pursuit, trying to force her into a position where his superior thrust-to-weight ratio would give him the advantage. That was his tell. Time to turn this around. Lena reversed hard, accepting the momentary vulnerability to force a head-on pass. Burkut took the bait, diving in for what should have been an easy guns kill. But Lena knew something he didn't. The F-16's gun was bore-sighted slightly off-axis, designed for snapshots during high-G maneuvering. She didn't need perfect alignment. She needed close enough. They passed canopy to canopy at a combined closure rate over Mach 2. Lena fired. The 20 cannon rounds walked through the air where Burkut's MiG would be in half a second. Hits not catastrophic, but enough. Rounds tore through his left wing root, severing hydraulic lines and damaging control surfaces. Burkut's MiG rolled violently, the pilot fighting for control. His voice came over the radio, frustrated but still professional. Good shooting. Very good. But this is not over. He was right. The MiG was damaged but still flying, still dangerous. But now Lena had the advantage. Burkut had to defend, had to manage his damaged aircraft, had to think about survival instead of killing. She pressed the attack methodically, forcing him into defensive maneuvers that aggravated the damage. His MiG began trailing smoke. The left wing was losing pieces. Finally, after 17 minutes of combat, Lena maneuvered into a position for a shot he couldn't defend against. Last Sidewinder lock, perfect tone. Burkut, you're done. Eject now or take the missile, your choice. There was a pause, a moment of profound shared reflection across the cold, empty air. Then the voice of a professional accepting defeat with honor. Good kill, Viper, you earned this. You're a better pilot than I thought possible. Gender means nothing. Skill is skill, he ejected before she could fire. The MiG tumbled out of control before exploding against a mountainside. Lena circled once, verified the parachute deployment, and headed home. 29 confirmed kills. She had done it by proving that ability mattered more than assumptions. Back at base, the squadron met her on the flight line, not to celebrate but to learn. They had watched the entire engagement on data link, seen how she had managed every phase of the fight. That transition at minute 3, Santos said immediately when you reversed into the head-on pass, that was textbook reading the opponent's psychology. You waited for him to shift tactics, then exploited the exact moment when his mindset changed. Lena nodded. He was good enough that I couldn't beat him in a pure energy fight. So I had to beat him psychologically, make him think he was winning, then turn his confidence into vulnerability. Razor was shaking his head in amazement. You just beat their best pilot. That's going to make you a legend. Lena smiled, a genuine, hard-earned expression of personal redemption and quiet pride. I was already a legend, Jake. You just didn't know it. She headed for the debriefing, already thinking about the intelligence value of the engagement, the lessons to share with the squadron, and the next mission waiting somewhere over the horizon. Behind her, the squadron watched her go. The quiet logistics officer who'd been sitting in their mess hall, listening to them brag about kills they didn't have, was actually hiding the fact that she'd achieved more than all of them combined. They had underestimated her. The enemy had underestimated her. Everyone always did. That was fine. Captain Lena Hart had built a career on being underestimated, and every time she proved them wrong, it was at Mach 2 with a missile lock they never saw coming. The ones who learned from it, like Razor and Santos, became better pilots. The ones who didn't, like Burkut, learned the hard way that assumptions in combat were deadly. In the ready room later, someone had updated the squadron kill board. At the top, in neat letters, was the final, undeniable truth, Viper 29. Below it, someone had added a simple, poetic epitaph for the fallen ego and the birth of a legend. They didn't know, then they found out. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.